Anti-abuse campaigner Leslie Elliott has been brought to Manawatu by Zonta, and she's been spending her time talking to schools and other groups about the prevalence of violence and abuse, and also how to recognise it. Welcome to Manawatu, Leslie.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, you were thrust tragically and unwillingly into this role. What made you a campaigner?
When Sophie died in 2008, and after she died at the hands of a former boyfriend, I realised then, some months after, that she had actually been an abused woman in the 5-month relationship that she'd had. It was different. It was mostly psychological abuse. It didn't physically abuse her till near the end, but she lived at home with me, and I hadn't recognised the signs. When I did and I thought about it, I realised then that she had, as I say, been psychologically abused, and that made, then I thought about, when the trial and everything was over, that I had to do something on her behalf, and I felt like she was giving me a message that I needed to talk to young girls, was my initial thoughts, and tell them about the relationship that she'd had and the signs that we had missed in it, and to beware. So that was sort of where it all started. We obviously had a trial to come up, which was about 20 months later, so there was a lot of other things going on, and so it was something that I would do after that was over. When it was over, we were pretty exhausted. It took me a while to recover. When I recovered, one day I woke up and I thought, I've got to do this for her, and so that's where it all started.
So how did you put a campaign like this together? Because, you're still working, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. I am. Yes, I work 3 days a week as a nurse. How did I put it together? What I'm doing at the moment is I go around telling, I call it Sophie's story, what we missed. And it's basically just the signs in the relationship and that are so classic in abusive relationships. So I call it that because I missed it as well. We're not an abusive family by nature, and I see it so clearly now, but I didn't at the time. I just thought his behaviour was unusual and it was different, but I didn't see it as being abusive. So that sort of is what started me off, really.
So what were those signs that you missed?
Well, on hindsight now, they were very up and down relationship in terms of contact. It was very haphazard. She never knew quite where she was with him. There was a lot of name calling. There was a lot of shouting. I could never come quite. I used to say to her, "What was he shouting about?" When he got frustrated, he would shout at her, and name calling was another thing. It was very subtle stuff. Certainly was very different from any relationship she'd had before. She had 3 nice boyfriends before who treated her well. There was nothing special about it. There was nothing. She was very much into caring and loving and forgiving and that, but he wasn't like that at all. He was very self-centred. It was all about him and what he wanted to do. And it's really hard to put your finger on it. What I talk about those communication, which I understand for most abusers is very frenetic and obsessional, whereas in her case it was sort of the other way around. It was like, I'll leave it to you to contact me sort of thing, and she was confused as to whether he wanted to or didn't want to. And that, it was just, it's really hard even now to describe, but the things that I touch on, there were sexual issues, which I won't go into, but they came up at the trial. They were difficult. She put it all down to herself. She said it was all her fault. And, if she changed, he wouldn't say these things and do these things sort of thing. So, yeah, it was quite a subtle thing, and that's what's hard to sort of get over to people when I talk to them. But, yeah, it's the psychological that was difficult. He did, physically assault her near the end. And sometimes I say, and it sounds awful to say it, but I wished he'd hit her earlier on, because if he had, we would have recognised it then, but we didn't.
It strikes me as some form of passive-aggressive behaviour from this person.
It is really, yes. I guess you could say that it is. He was diagnosed as a narcissistic, having a narcissistic personality trait. And what I do say to particularly adult audiences, because they understand what that is, that that's no excuse for what he did. That's just his personality. But it doesn't mean to say you have to be an abuser just because you're a narcissistic. But I guess what it is that he had no empathy and, only really thought about himself. in the relationship, and I guess it had been with previous ones that he'd had as well.
Yes, but he didn't terminate them.
No, what we understand is that his previous girlfriends left him, and they had reasons to leave. They were leaving town or finishing a whatever and moving on in their careers or going overseas or whatever, and they were able to get away. Of course, Sophie was leaving also. The relationship was over. We still really to this day don't know why he killed her. We've got some theories, but they're only really theories, and they don't really add up to ruining his own life plus his family and ours. It just doesn't seem to add up somehow, but that's just the way it is.
That's what happened. So what is the core of your message, especially to young women?
Well, the core is basically is looking at their relationship with their boyfriends and that, and how they feel about it. Do they feel good? Is the guy making them feel good? And what we say is, and I'm not the only one that's out there giving this message, is that if you're in a relationship with a guy, you should feel good about it. You know, if he wants to be with you and purports to love you or like you, whatever, it should be good. It shouldn't be that he's saying these things on one hand and then on the other abusing you and calling you names, and which seems to be really common in abusive relationships, and it was in Sophie's, name calling and those sorts of things. I'm not sure whether he purported to love her. I'm not too sure that ever came into it, but maybe Sophie naively thought that he did. I'm not really too sure. But so the core of the message is raising awareness, and it's to get young people, and I mean guys as well, to think about, well, you know, I want to be with this person, so you're not going to be being horrible to them all the time. It sounds very basic, but that's what it's about. And young girls particularly say to me, when I talk about the psychological, they say, what do you mean by that? And I say, it's the stuff that gets in your head here and that you can't get rid of. And women that have been abused tell me that broken arms and black eyes and bruises and that heal, but they say it's the stuff that's up here takes a lot longer to change and to get rid of. And so I guess it is a raising awareness. You know, I'm not telling them what they should do or shouldn't do, but I'm just raising awareness to what happened, what Sophie experienced and that we didn't recognise. So I'm saying, look at it. If you're not feeling comfortable, if you're feeling unsafe or feel it just not right, maybe you need to think about it and perhaps go and talk to somebody about it, that sort of thing.
Is there a message here for parents of youngsters? Because after all, when you're in a teenage years, your self-esteem relies an awful lot on what other people think of you and how they regard you.
I totally agree. It's a difficult time, teenage years. It was for all of us, I guess, but I think today with social networking and that, it's even more difficult. I think for parents, and who am I to talk, but I think that my experience, I think, is to keep an open mind and to listen, to be that listening post for them. I mean, I listened to Sophie, and people say to me, oh, you're lucky, you know, she listened to you. I don't know whether she did. She did listen to me, I guess, really. She would defend him. If I make criticism of him, she'd say, oh, wasn't that bad, or he didn't mean it, and those sorts of things. I'm sure she'd feel differently now, but I think it's just being open to listening to them and being supportive in that role. I used to tell her to drop him and say, dump him, Soph, there's lots of nice guys out there, you don't need to. But I didn't push it. I mean, she was 22, and I think once you start pushing it with your teenagers, they tend not to tell you things. And I didn't openly go out to seek her to tell me things all the time. We were close anyway, and she did share her life with me, so that wasn't difficult. But I don't always say she took notice of what I said, but I did try and just support her, really. In the end, I couldn't, and I suggested she get some counselling, which she did, but by that time it was probably too late anyway. So, yeah, I would say to parents, just being there for them and supportive. And I say to the young people, you know, if you've got somebody special in your life, it's mum or dad or both of them, that's great, but it might be a grandma, it might be an uncle or an auntie or whatever that you can talk to, and it's not too judgmental, or listen and maybe make some suggestions to you in that, you know, because otherwise you're absolutely right. Teenagers will just turn off and think, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, I know best, and those sorts of things. So it's not easy, Most people with kids would know that, and teenagers particularly.
And there's no manual.
No, absolutely not. There isn't, the same as there isn't for dating relationships, and that's what the girls particularly say to me, you know. We have plenty of sex education, but we don't know how to get on with boys. And boys say basically the same things, just couch it slightly differently, but they all say the same thing. So it's like they can't seem to relate other relationships, like with your family and, trust and respect and those sorts of things that we bring into our general relationships with family and friends and workmates and that sort of thing. It seems like dating boyfriend-girlfriend relationships are different, and they have to have a special sort of training for it. And it does seem to be different. Worldwide, there are courses and groups and that are doing the same sort of work, working in with young people on their relationships and just looking at them, whether they're healthy or unhealthy, and controlling and not controlling and that sort of thing. So, yeah, it is different. I don't know that it's probably always been like that, but it seems to be more emphasised now. Perhaps Quality did that, I'm not sure.
No plans of writing that manual?
No, absolutely not. Not writing any more books.
Now you have got one book, and that tells the same story that you're out and about with at the moment.
The book that I wrote, was Bill O'Brien, who is an author, was an ex-policeman but was an author, came to Gil and I, my husband and I, and said that he would like to write our story. He got quite angry during the trial at the way that it was initially made to look like Sophie was the ogre in the whole story. And as happens, often it's the victim is blamed, but the victim's not there to defend themselves. And also, as a witness, as I was, you're asked a question in court and you answer it and you can't deviate either way. So you don't get always to tell the full story. So Bill came to Gil and I and wanted to write our story. I was very reluctant. I felt like it was our tragic story. I didn't think there was a book in it. But however, Gil was quite keen, and Bill said he could write the whole story. So we agreed to go ahead with it. He'd started writing it briefly and did some interviews with Gil and I, and then he came to me one day and he said, "You've got to write this. This is your story." I can. So that was how that sort of started. So it is the whole story. It's the relationship. It's what happened, and it's the justice system, which my husband has been working on, changing things for victims, and it's got everything in it. It's not an easy read in some respects, but it's an easy read in the way it's laid out, and that thanks to Bill and his wife Owen. So we've apparently Random House tell us we've sold about 10,000 copies, which apparently is quite good for that sort of book. And we've had a lot of feedback from it, and we still get it from people who've read the book and have either got out of relationships or have seen, know somebody that is in a relationship that's very similar. We've had police use it, giving it to women who've been abused and won't get out of relationships, and have said, go away and read this and see what you think. And then they've come back and said, well, we're not going back, sort of thing, because they've seen their own relationship and what happened to Sophie. So, yeah, it was a hard ride. There were many tears and many times when we thought we'd pull it. And Bill said, if you don't want to do it, we'll pull it, but we didn't. And I'm glad it's there. I must admit I haven't read it myself since it was published. It's a bit too hard, and my sons have got it. One's read it and one hasn't, but I said, well, you don't need to, you know the story anyway. So, yeah, it's I'm pleased it's there, but I probably won't ever read it again myself. So,
With that volume of sales, obviously there's a need and an interest. Just how prevalent is violent abuse or even emotional, psychological abuse in New Zealand?
We don't really know what it is, but the police say they get one call every 7 minutes, 24/7.
One call every 7 minutes?
7 minutes, 24/7, from a woman either in an abusive situation or wanting some advice about it. And they think they're only capturing about 18 to 20% of what is going on in the community. So you've got another approximately 80% who are not calling or revealing what's going on in their lives. So that's we don't feature very well statistically worldwide, and certainly in New Zealand that's pretty poor. Police have also told me that if the 80% came forward, that they wouldn't be able to cope. It would just be so much. So there's a lot out there. We hear it so much, the awful stories, the children that have died and women that have died. In 2009, there was some research done in New Zealand, and it came out that there was 14 women a year were dying at the hands of a partner or ex-partner, and apparently I understand that hasn't changed. I say that Sophie's been dead 5 years, and that's approximately 70 women in 5 years have died at the hands of an abuser or of a partner or previous partner. So it's pretty awful. I find it hard to get my head around that, to be quite honest. That doesn't include children, and we hear about them. They usually feature in the news pretty clearly. So it's not good at all.
That is, those are horrendously sobering stats.
They are. A lot of them we don't hear about. They quietly happen, and the trials come about, and you might see them in the paper somewhere along the line. But a lot of them are quite quiet, and it is hard to get your head around, really. So I find it difficult, but they tell me that's true. So
You find it difficult, and yet you're very bravely bearing your soul that other people might learn something from what happened to you and Sophie.
Well, I'm absolutely adamant that had Sophie had some sort of program at high school in her last 1 or 2 years of school, that it would have rung some alarm bells when she got into this relationship. As I said, she'd had 3 other relationships, which were good ones. They were treated well, there was no abuse in them or anything. And she didn't recognise it in this relationship, even though it was different from what she'd previously experienced. But I think if she had had a program at school of some kind, that alarm bells would have sounded, and she would have been alerted and maybe thought, hang on, this is not right, I remember that at school. So that's why I'm on this campaign. It's not about me. In some ways it's not about Sophie personally, but it's about what happened to her and what she experienced and didn't recognise. So yeah, we've got to get it into schools, and we've been travelling around the country. I've done about 160 presentations, a lot of schools, community meetings and that, and I've not had anybody say don't do it. It's being done. There are a lot of people working there, a lot of people going into schools, a lot of network people going into schools and helping. They can continue that. We're just another one to add to the list, and the more people that can get the message over to young people, the better. So particularly, well, for guys particularly, a lot of them unfortunately have not got good role models, male role models in their lives, and sadly I've come to that realisation in the last couple of years, which is very sad. But also girls that don't have good role models, they see perhaps mum being abused by dad, and then boyfriends come along and they abuse mum, and they think that's their lot. That's what it is for us. And guys see it and think that's what we do. That's the way guys treat women, and so we have to stop it somewhere, and education seems to be the way to go, and research has shown that raising awareness at the younger age. We're tackling year 12. We've just done a pilot, and piloted 9 schools, and had it professionally evaluated, and the preliminary evaluation has just come out, and it's very good. It's telling us that we're on the right track, and this is what we need to do. So it's a 1-day program that will be available to year 12 students, boys and girls, and it basically raises their awareness and gets them thinking about what's a healthy and unhealthy relationship, and so that they can think when they're in a relationship where if it feels not quite right or feels unsafe, they need to think about what they're going to do and maybe seeking some support or help.